Hello, my name is Melissa Croy from New Orleans, Louisiana. First, I would like to thank Mark and Ava Dawn of Seraphimmer Books for giving me the opportunity to publish in Volume 1 of Garbanzo Literary Journal. I would love to be with all of you tonight in Bethel, Connecticut, at Molta Java and Bird Books. However, I cannot. But I will be reading to you via video my fragment, Broken Straw. So without further ado, my name is Melissa Croy, and this is my fragment, Broken Straw. There are things other than beauty you understand, the man who would identify himself only as Oberon stated with a grand sweep of his hand. Power, for example, or intimidation, revenge. Beauty is such an unoriginal and petty want, young lady. Beauty fades. Beauty betrays and leaves you in the night along with your lover. Might you not ask for something far grander, something to inspire? The woman wrung the handkerchief in her gloved hands, making quite an unpleasant squeaking sound. Her head was bowed, a tiny hat perched on top of its brown ringlets, its feathers bobbing with worry and frustration. In the pause that continued, Oberon quite wondered if an egg was hatching in there, ready to burst through the curls. His musing was interrupted by her frustrated squeal that turned into quite a raucous growl. "Why do you talk such nonsense to me? Power? Intimidation? Beauty is the only power afforded to women of my stature. Bosh! Women in general. Have you not seen the works of the painters, the poets, the musicians of this age? Vapid, empty eyes, perfect faces, curvaceous frames, hair like silken rivers, and skin unblemished by the air. This putrid, rotten air!" Oberon lifted one corner of his mustached lips, revealing unnaturally sharp teeth that glinted menacingly in the gaslight. His smirk spoke of a dangerous man, and one that was, for lack of better analogy, currently playing with his food. Sometimes it is not only the air that is rotten, madam. Orchid, for that was the unfortunate name given to Oberon's visitor, was a stunning example of homeliness. Thin, with pinched features, she might have been passable if not for the venomous grimace that further undignified her face. Oberon pondered the notion that if she had half a wit, he would like to employ such a distasteful and conniving soul into his services. But he did not care for her covetous, greedy nature. The last thing he needed was to deal with a coup d'etat at the stage of his career. A pity, however, the fun was just beginning. "Very well," he announced. "Candytuft, a word!" Orchid jumped at this sudden bellowing into the darkness. Just as she recovered from the initial shock of the outburst, a second fright emerged from the shadows. An incomparably small, thin man, quite like a reed, appeared before them. "Yes, master," he chirped. His voice was like a wheel against cobblestones, and he smelled of rain and dirt and something that the impatient girl could not place. The effect was strangely pleasing and not distasteful in the least. "Candytuft," Oberon began, "do you mind being small and brown and unnoticed?" The little man chuckled. Now this sound was indeed unpleasant. He wrung his tiny hands together. They looked like twigs. But surely this was just a trick of the smog that hung over the city. "Oh, master, course not. How could a bit like me survive looking like a peacock? Me a thing of the wild, a thing of the shadows, a thing of the dark. Me hides, me waits, me serves master without a sound, and cares not for beauty, cares not for mankind who decides." "Decides what, my dear Candytuft?" inquired Oberon. Candytuft leaned around Oberon's side, lovingly putting one hand around him protectively. The small man only came up to the larger man's waist, but he exuded menace. "What pretty, what useful, what important. Candytuft sneaky. Candytuft not need silly hat to be sneaky." At this he smiled a toothy grin that exposed a mouth full of sharp teeth. Though frightened by this new revelation of the tiny man, Orchid's pride was stronger. Her hands flew to the hat that precariously clung to her scalp, certainly that she had just been insulted. This did not escape Oberon's notice, and he revisited his earlier opinions of her, certain that he was going to enjoy this more than he originally expected. "Thank you, Candytuft," Oberon said, turning once again to the now quite disheveled and homely Miss Orchid. "Well, my dear, I have expressed my strong opinion that your quest is folly, but if you insist, I will make the necessary arrangements for your wish to be fulfilled. That is my job, to provide information and to fulfill dreams, no matter how impractical I find them to be." Now I believe we have a matter of payment to discuss. I believe you said you have something for me. Keep in mind, my dowdy little darling, that my services do not come cheap, and that I have strong suspicions that you will not be able to pay." Orchid bristled at this, all of it, and reached to the velvet purse that hung from her wrist. She squared her bony shoulders, looked Oberon directly in the eye, and turned over her cloth-wrapped gift. Oberon returned her gaze for a full minute before he returned his attention to the package that now sat in his palm. He carefully unwrapped the silk from around the globe that shone like a small sun, illuminating his face with its warm yellow glow. Where did you get this?" he inquired with awe. Orchid was now beginning to feel quite superior. She tried to straighten herself even more. "I received it from Madame Charlatan. She was the one who told me where to reach you." "Madame Charlatan? The spiritualist?" Oberon chuckled. "Don't tell me you've been consulting that fraud. Did the spirits knock on your bony, empty little skull during her seance? Did they demand entry into the tiny room that is your head?" The girl was now furious. "Does that fulfill your requirement or not?" she demanded. Now, no need to get testy. This will be more than enough. Our deal is cemented. Tonight as you sleep, your wishes will be fulfilled. It is imperative that in preparation you cover all the mirrors in your home and remove your jewelry. My, assistants do not like to be taunted by the living. They are granting you something they can no longer have, and they will now resent you for it. They do this deed only at my bidding, and they could serve only me. Do not fear. They cannot harm you, as they are completely under my control. It is by my leave that they have not moved on to claim the eternal reward that they so deserve." Orchid had gone a pale white at this speech, the color more befitting of a lily or a moonflower than of her namesake. She began to back away at the matter-of-fact tone that the strange man employed. "Not so fast, my dear. We now have a contract," he boomed. "One last thing," he called, as her pace quickened and tears began to stream down her face. "If in the span of 1 fortnight you have not exalted in the divinity of human nature, then wept for the animal it contains, and been crushed by this knowledge, you have not truly lived. If you have not been done great harm by another member of your fair species, and found yourself, in turn, capable of great harm, you have not truly lived." His booming laughter stayed with her until she found herself home. Oberon watched her flee, and removed the globe again from his pocket. Within the glowing depths lay a single orchid, its petals briefly opening for him, then just as quickly shutting and closing forever. It lay upon a bed of broken straw, and at this Oberon was truly pleased. Somewhere in the gritty town, Orchid lay down to sleep in the tiny dusty loft that she called home, shivering with fear. Sure that she would never be able to sleep, she clenched her eyes shut and shortly dreamed.